One of the joys of sports, whether high school, college, pro, or local rec leagues, is watching a team come together. Whether it's the right situation to bring out their best, growing together to reach their full potential and learning to win, or adding that one key piece that brings it all together and puts a team over the hump, team building is one of the narratives that drives hopeless optimism of sports fans year round with the timeless refrain, wait till next year. Oftentimes, though, that next year never actually arrives, and a team's window to win closes in heartbreaking fashion. Worse yet, it may end in a fashion that leads fans to believe the team was robbed and their emotional investment mocked. Usually, that's not really the case, but what if it was true? This is what you don't know about the 2002 Sacramento Kings and Game 6 of that year's Western Conference Finals. Welcome to What You Don't Know About Sports, where we delve into the forgotten stories, teams, and athletes of sports history and question widely held takes on today's sports. I'm Matt, and this is Blake.
Hi.
And today we want to bring you a story about a time where the refs really did screw a team out of a win. We're pretty sure of it anyway. Blake, what is your least favorite refereeing trope? Like a thing that referees do that's just aggravating.
This could go for basically any sport. But when the referee makes the game about themselves, and when I say that, I don't mean like, of course, blowing calls are bad, getting calls wrong are bad, betting on games and forcing that game to make you much of money is bad. What I mean is when a referee is competing for an Oscar on the floor or on the field or whatever, when they're overly dramatic in their foul calls and their flag throws, and you could just tell they're overly dramatic when they make the foul call on the PA system in front of 80,000 people. I cannot remember that ref's name in the NFL, but it's going to bother me. Always just yelling and like flexing biceps while you're pointing to one side of the field or the other, and just the overly dramatic referee. They're trying to make the game about themselves, and I'm just not here for it. They just need to get out of the way, let the game be the game, call the calls, and like the calls they're making are fine most of the time. The calls they're making are fine. It's like the way that they call them that's just obnoxious to me. Like, just get over yourself.
If you didn't like Ed Hockley and Teddy Valentine, you should have just said so.
Now you know. It's like a jacked cop directing traffic, pointing biceps all over the place. It's just weird. I don't like it.
It is. I think mine is this came as an admission from the ACC head of officials in basketball once, and it's leaked out a couple of other times that this happens. It is referees reviewing game film to look for tendencies of the players that they're getting ready to referee. As an example, people who are ACC basketball fans may know this, especially if you're an NC State fan. At one point, Richard Howell was the center for NC State, and he was routinely called for fouls where he would hedge out on a screen, which was the way NC State defended screens on the perimeter. Anybody else on NC State's roster hedged on a screen, and it was not a foul. Almost anybody else in the conference did it. It's okay. But when Richard Howell was the man in the pick and roll that was going to have to hedge, that was always going to be a foul. And there was never going to be a situation where it wasn't, because they had reviewed film and decided that Richard Howell fouled on screens when he hedged. And so every time he did it, they blew a foul. That's just ridiculous. Just call the game that's in front of you. If 9 guys on the floor can do it and it's okay, then the 10th guy can too. Pretty sure that's the way it should work. But
right. No, and it leans itself towards referees just knowing the tendencies of players just from refereeing so many games, especially in pros, right? Like because
Yeah.
college kids rotate in and out, and those you're only gonna ref them so many times. But like a seasoned NBA ref, while since we're going that way, a seasoned NBA ref just knowing the tendencies and having bad relationships with certain players because of past issues and stuff, you're more likely to call fouls. You're more likely to call technical fouls, which severely alters games. Like what year was the Cavs Warriors that the comeback? 16. Draymond got a technical, and that's still debated to this day. We're not here to talk about that, but that's just an example. And so refs call, like you said, call the games in front of you. Don't make it about yourself, and just do your job. That's why you're there. Should be that simple, but it's not, is it?
Should be. Never is. If you asked Chris Webber or Rick Adelman or any member of the town of Sacramento, honestly, not even just the members of the team, they might would tell you their least favorite refereeing trope is when the NBA decides to rig an entire conference finals against them, which is the point of our story today. We're going to take turns leading you through some of this backstory before we tell you about the actual game. We're going to get started with how that Kings team came to be, because as the intro said, team building in professional sports in particular is a really cool way of looking at it. And this Kings team has a really good story. So by the way, the name Kings comes from the fact that they were called the royalty of the NBA back when the NBA first started. The team was at first the Rochester Royals and won the third ever NBA championship to exist, hence the name Royalty. Eventually, though, they moved to Cincinnati, where they had Oscar Robertson, one of the greatest of all times, Mr. Triple Double himself. Eventually, they moved to Kansas City, and since there was already a team there called the Royals, they changed their name to the Kings. Which, by the way, I love when cities have some sort of like synergy on colors or names, like black and yellow in Pittsburgh and Seattle making blue and green their entire personality, and all. I just that kind of stuff is cool. So the Kings and the Royals existed in Kansas City, but eventually in 1985, the franchise moved yet again to Sacramento. From 1985 to the 1998 lockout, the team played 15 seasons in Sacramento, and they did make the playoffs a couple of times, but they lost. They were all losing below 500 seasons in each of those 15 years. And in 1999, they hired a new coach. Let's enter Rick Adelman. Adelman is one of the potential subjects for one of our future episodes. I know we've kicked his name around a little bit, so here's just a little about him. He was the coach of the Portland Trailblazers from 1989 to 1994. In his 5 full seasons there, he never won less than 47 games and won 54 times, topping out at 63. So if you're not like a seasoned NBA fan, 47 games, that's above 500. That's really good. 50 is the equivalent of 10 wins in NFL season. That's solid. When you get to 63, you're in that rarefied air. We're talking about like 110 wins in baseball. We're talking 13 and 14 win seasons in the NFL. They did that under Rick Adelman. He also went to 2 NBA finals, one of which is the most famous for being the Jordan Shrug series. And so they
As
lost.
we both shrug while you say that, like we have to.
So they lost both, but they did go. Clyde Drexler on that team. Solid teams. He has a reputation for being a player's coach, but one of the good ones that actually got good results out of being a player's coach and had a good tenure despite being a player's coach. When you look at his offense in particular, it is one that that this generation, that kind of time of basketball was filled with some of these concepts where there's positionless offenses and not really set plays, just like actions that are taking place on the court. And if the ball goes here, everybody knows what their job is, and that's kind of the offense they ran. There was a lot of screens, off ball screens, not necessarily Princeton offense, but some of those concepts, back cuts and things like that were there. Former players talk about how the practices and his philosophy was just to teach them how to make the right decision at all times. The ball's here, I go there, I set a screen here, right? This kind of stuff. One of the things I noticed in looking at him is he runs a lot of screens where there's two guys screening for a player, which is something that we would end up doing again now, 20 years later, where we run double screens for 3-point shooters.
Yeah.
The team itself started building its core in 1999. They traded for Chris Webber. He of the Chris Webber trade that never ends. This was one
Still going,
strand.
folks.
This is
still going.
One of those strands. If you don't know what we're talking about, check out the Trade That Never Ends episode, because it will never. They get him as a part of that trade chain. We know he's a talented passer. He's a talented post player. He's got one of the first examples of becoming a stretch four, not to the 3-point arc, but to the deep mid-range area of the floor. They trade for him from Washington. They acquired Vlade Divac, who was once part of the Kobe Bryant trade from Charlotte to LA. They require him from the Charlotte Hornets. He's a center, same kind of player as Chris Webber before the 1999 season. Scott Pollard, who had one of the best goatees in early 2000s. Frosted tip goatee. In 1999, they signed him as a free agent. And point guard Jason Williams, not the power forward Jason Williams that murdered some people, and not the current ESPN personality Jay Williams, but the other one that made all the flashy passes that was out there playing and one basketball in the NBA.
I was about to say that. He's an and one player who played in the NBA.
That was him. They drafted him before the lockout shortened 1999 season, so they were fun to watch, and they had a lot of guys that were changing the way the game of basketball was played, right? Power forwards that could shoot, point guards that were flashy and willing to play all over the place. And so then in 2000, they added Peja Stojakovic, whom they had drafted in 1996, but had stayed in Europe. They retained his rights. Eventually, he came over in 2000. He was a really good 3-point shooter and would actually be an all-star twice in his career, and he would do it in just 2 seasons of being here. So by 2002, he was an all-star. And then in 2001, they added swingman Doug Christie, who is, not by today's standards, a 3-and-D type player, but was a really good perimeter defender for the team. They drafted Heydou Turkoglu. It's a fun name. I love that name.
Love Turkoglu.
Heydou Turkoglu. They drafted him 16th in the first round in 2001. Stretch defender, perimeter defender, 3-point shooter, really good role player. And then they got Bobby Jackson in free agency, who would be an important rotation player. With those players, they made the playoffs in 1999. They actually, in the strike-shortened 99 season, won the same 27 games that they had won in 1998, giving them their first winning season in 15 years. In 2000, they made the playoffs again, but in both instances, they lost in the first round in 5 games, which, remember, at that time, the series were best of 5, so it went the distance. The first time they lost to the 2-time defending conference champions, the Utah Jazz, who still had Malone and Stockton going into that season. Then next, they lost to the eventual champion, the Lakers. Dun, dun,
Foreshadowing,
dun.
people.
Yeah. In 2001, they beat the Suns in the first round and then faced the Lakers again in the second, but this time they got swept. This was the Lakers team that won the second title in a row and went 15-1 through the postseason, which is a role that we may never see again. That team absolutely dominated. And after that season, Chris Webber was a free agent. He had a decision to make. Do I stay here and keep rolling, or do I try to find the better situation? To convince him to stay, the team drafted Gerald Wallace from Alabama. He would eventually become a Charlotte Bobcat legend. First,
Gerald
the
Wallace.
first player taken in their expansion draft. Was a lot of lean years before recently. Then crucially, they traded for point guard Mike Bibby, sending Jason Williams and Nick Anderson. And if you're wondering, yes, that's the same Nick Anderson of missing the free throws to win the Magic a championship fame. They traded those two guys to Vancouver/Memphis for Mike Bibby. This cut Jason Williams, who had a 19% turnover rate in 100 possessions, down to just 11.1% per 100 possessions on a higher usage rate. So that's just a fancy stat that means the number of times that the player is significantly involved in a play. So they used Bibby more than Williams, and he turned it over less. He was not a flashy passer. He was more conservative, but he got the job done, and he had the added benefit of being clutch for days. And this convinced Weber to return to the team because it was still in win now mode. They had a core. They just improved the position that they were struggling with the most. And he re-signed, that's the right way to say that word, for 7 years, which I will never understand why pro athletes sign such long contracts, assuming that they're going to get hurt instead of short contracts to maximize their money. But you know what? Go do you, right? 7-year contract. And this meant that they entered the 2001-02 season with the third best odds to win the championship behind only the Lakers and the Spurs. They would go on to win 61 divisions and the Pacific Division back in the good old days of the NBA when there were only 2 divisions in each conference instead of 3. One of the best regular season teams that year, and they made the playoffs yet again. And that's where things start to go wild.
Yes. Yeah. The Mike Bibby trade was all time great trade, and if this had worked out, this team, if they had worked out, they may have won more than one, and it would have been like an all time great trade. But we don't think about it because he went there and they didn't win a championship, even though they won all these games and they progressed in the playoffs all the way, almost all the way. We're never going to know because we're about to tell you why.
And this is one of those trades. It's like perfect time, perfect place, because if the Grizzlies weren't moving from Vancouver to Memphis, it probably doesn't happen. They were looking for, the Kings wanted a better point guard, and the Grizzlies wanted somebody that was going to sell tickets. So
you get
Jason Williams was the guy that was going to sell tickets.
Yep, best of both worlds. And Mike Bibby cutting turnovers in half.
Mm-hmm.
Like in half. It's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But team building in general is an absolute art form. And I think it's going away. Definitely going away in professional sports. GMs just don't. I don't know if they just don't know how to do it, but like we're in like a LeBron James era where Le GM, is that what Kyrie called him that recently? Where he built the team in Cleveland, and they won a championship and all that stuff. But team building is a thing, and it's reflecting in today's NBA. As of this recording, the Eastern and Western Conference NBA Finals are happening, and all 4 of the teams that are left were built properly. So it says something, or it should.
Yeah, and it's better. The sports, all sports are healthier when that's the way teams are being built. And you're right. There was a long stretch where it was the LeBron super team style teams that won in the NBA. Even in the NFL, like the Rams this year winning the Super Bowl, I do not like the way that team was constructed at all. It's like very Florida Marlins-esque, and like I don't think it's good for sports at all, or for the NFL. If teams, winning, like if teams copycat that and just like grab a bunch of players at the last minute, like the essentially a good version of the Washington Redskin model from the late 90s. I don't know. It's just not. That's less fun. That's less fun than narratives built on a team trying to overcome something.
Yeah, but it's great for winning because it worked out.
Yeah, well, it worked. So
But
do
anyway,
it.
yeah. So anyway, we're gonna talk very briefly about the referee situation for this game, this Western Conference Finals Game 6. So the officials assigned to this game, if you're NBA fans, you might recognize some or all or at least one of these. The officials were Dick Bavetta, Ted Bernhardt, and Bob Delaney. We're going to talk about them. Dick Bavetta got into officiating after his brother, who was actually an official in the ABA, he convinced them to try it. They both grew up playing basketball, and he played through all throughout his youth, so he already loved the game. His brother became an official, convinced him to try it. Bavetta actually once refed a game alone. This is back when there were only two officials. His partner broke his leg. He collided with Dennis Johnson, point guard of the Celtics back in the day. And Dennis Johnson collided with the ref and broke his leg. And there wasn't a replacement. And so Dick Bavetta had to ref the rest of the game by himself, which is pretty impressive. But that's a that's a lot. That's a lot. That's all I'm going to say.
Do you give the referee leniency in that situation? Like, is everybody just like, you know what, we're just, whatever he calls, we're going to accept? Or are you like the same way you would have been beforehand? Like, get everything right now.
If I think that if you're as strong of a competitor as most of these are, no, there's no leniency at all. But that's just what I would imagine anyway. So one particular instance I'm going to tell you about in Dick Bavetta's career for absolutely no reason whatsoever, but you'll hear it in a second. 1998 NBA Finals Game 6. You may already know what happens at the end and who wins, but there was a particular point in this game that Bavetta made a questionable call that may or may not have played into the outcome. So Bavetta ruled in the second quarter of the game, I believe, that a 3-point basket by Jazz point guard Howard Eisley was after the buzzer, which at the time, the Jazz were up by 4 points. And so he called off the basket. It went in. He said it was released after the buzzer. Replays showed that the shot should have counted, but there was no way to overturn it. Bob Costas was on the call, and he narrated the replay live, and the last thing he said was, "And they missed the call." Like it was fairly obvious on review what happened, but there was just no way to overturn it. And eventually, the Jazz lost the game by 1 point after the famous Michael Jordan jump shot over Byron Russell, where he about made him fall, break his head on the court, and he held his follow through for like the next year and a half. You probably recognize that.
Can you imagine if they would have called the foul on Michael Jordan before that moment?
The push?
Yeah. Like that's one of the times where it's like, let's, you know what? Don't do that. The other thing is Bob Costas is not known for this, but is absolutely savage with the way he calls sports when he's the play-by-play guy. Like him saying, and they missed the call, not one of the most offensive things he's ever said. So this one time, I just got to tell you this story. A Cubs guy was pitching terribly in a game that was being broadcast on the MLB network. So Costas was the guy calling it. And when he's leaving, he got pulled from the game. When he's leaving, he does the thing where he like pats his chest, points to the sky. And Bob Costas says something like, he's pointing to the sky. You would think calling on some long departed family member, asking for forgiveness for what he's just done to the game of baseball. And it's like, man, you're just going to commercial. Like, this is just a commercial bump, Bob. Calm down. Like, you don't have to do that.
Yes, he did. He absolutely did.
Absolutely hilarious.
He absolutely had to say that. But yeah, so this was a relatively tame Bob Costas, but he just flat out said on the thing, he's like, they missed the call.
And they did.
Apparently, it was that obvious. And the Jazz lost by 1, which would have put them to a Game 7. Mm-hmm. And so we'll never know what that outcome should have been. But just one example for no particular reason at all. And we're going to continue. regarding Ted Bernhardt, there's not a whole lot of information about him on the internet. He was a longtime official. Started in 1988, retired in 2006, and at some point after his arrest, get there in a second. After his retirement, he was arrested during a domestic dispute. He showed up at a female's door and was beating on the door and stuff and yelling, and the cops got called and stuff, and he was arrested for harassment or stalking or something. The third official, Bob Delaney, I didn't realize this. He was a New Jersey state trooper before he became an NBA referee. And he was an undercover officer, apparently infiltrating the mob in New Jersey in like the late 70s or early 80s. And he just gave that up to become a full-time NBA official. He was also a longtime NBA official. And now, if you Google his name, his website will pop up because he is now a motivational speaker and a consultant. So if you need any motivation on either how to infiltrate the mob or officiate an NBA game, he's your man.
If I am 0% shocked to find out that David Stern hired someone who was able to infiltrate the mob as one of his officials. 0% shocked in any way, shape.
At all.
The only thing that would be less shocking than that is if you told me someone left the mob to become an NBA official. That would be the only thing less shocking than someone able to infiltrate the mob was hired as an NBA official.
Tough. I mean, that's basically all the info on the referees. And again, that Dick Bavetta story was for absolutely no reason whatsoever.
Oh yeah, no.
Continue.
Before I tell you about Game 6, it is trivia time.
Oh, I told you to go ahead, and now you're going to embarrass me on live international radio.
This is one of the ones you're going to nail perfectly with only a couple of guesses, I'm sure.
Great. Couple of guesses.
We're discussing what really is the climax of the 2002 NBA playoffs. And so, in relation to that, your trivia question from me is this. Who led the 2002 NBA playoffs in points per game? The leader, only in the playoffs, not the season, the playoff leader in points per game in 2002.
I feel like this is a trick question. Like a name popped into my head immediately, and I feel like that's not right. I feel like it's got to be a trick question.
Okay. So,
did this player play in the finals?
No.
Okay, then it is a trick question.
It's a trick question, yeah. Good thing.
Dang. Okay.
Good thing you did not say Shaq or Kobe, because that would be
Shaquille O'Neal is who was about to come out of my mouth. Okay, that was my question. Okay, so I'm gonna throw out a question really fast and say, was it a player for the Sacramento Kings?
No.
Ooh. Okay.
Not that related to the story.
Not that related.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, what team did he play for?
The Orlando Magic.
I'm sorry, what?
The Orlando Magic.
You're just messing with me now.
Nope.
This is not fair. Nope. 2002 Orlando Magic was were they still there? Wheels are spinning. How do I ask this? Wait a minute. Who would have been on the Orlando Magic? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's who I'm thinking of. Who else played on the Magic? See, I've got too many thoughts going through my head at once. Okay, who else? What other teams did this player play for?
It's a good question. Actually, this player started. You're gonna get it. This player played with Toronto, Orlando, Houston, and then finished his career with the Knicks, Pistons, and Hawks.
Okay, the Knicks, the Pistons, and the Hawks.
All forgettable. Yeah,
are
discard
throwing me
those.
off.
Discard
So
those. Started his career in Toronto, went to Orlando, and we'll just say finished in Houston for all intents and purposes.
well, I mean, was his career basically over by the time he
Yes, yeah,
got there?
yeah.
Okay, so then the answer would be Tracy McGrady.
The cousin of Vince Carter, yes, Tracy McGrady
He
was
led the
the
playoffs in points.
famously never won a series, or at least didn't win a
Yeah.
series for a very long time. So he had 30.8 points per game all in the first round in 2002.
Did they only played in the first round? Were they eliminated? Is that why he didn't have a chance to
Yep.
mess up?
Yep.
Hmm.
They lost.
Fascinating. 38
They,
points? Good lord.
Yep. Indeed. 30,
That was a goodie.
Yeah, so Shaq actually led the playoffs in points scored.
Oh, I see what
overall.
you did there.
Yeah.
See what you did there. Okay.
Yep.
Points per game. That was good.
Yeah, but yes, and they lost to the Charlotte Hornets in 4 games in the first round.
They got swept and he was scoring 38 a game. That's so bad.
Indeed. All right. To game 6 of the Western Conference Finals. In the first 5 games of this series, the Lakers averaged 25 free throw attempts per game. Let me say that again. In the first 5 games of the series, full games, 4 quarters, 48 minutes, the Lakers averaged 25 free throw attempts per game. In the fourth quarter of game 6, they attempted 27 free throws and made 21.
Oh my god! There are plenty of teams who don't score 21 points in an NBA quarter. They scored 21 from the free throw line in the fourth quarter.
On YouTube, this game without commercials is about 3 hours long. Somebody's uploaded the whole non-commercial game. The fourth quarter makes up an hour of that because it was played almost entirely at the LA Lakers free throw line. To contrast that, the Kings shot a normal amount of free throws. They got 9 free throws in the fourth quarter, making 7 of them.
Solid.
Yep. The Kings, to their credit, were up 3-2 coming into this series. I would be remiss for not pointing out their mistakes. People who love to absolve referees love to point out that they are not the reason teams lose games or series, and so I will give them some due. It is not the referee's fault that the series wasn't already over. In game 4 of the series, you may have seen the highlights of this. The Lakers down 2 are struggling to make a basket to send it to overtime. Vlade Divac taps the ball back, trying to just launch it back toward his own basket. Big shot. Robert Horry collects it and nails a 3 to win at the buzzer. That's not the referee's fault. Otherwise, the series would have been over in 5 games and not back in LA for a 6th game.
Which is incredible to think about. Like, you think about the Kobe and Shaq three-peat thing, and this Kings team was that close to beating this team in 5 games. Incredible.
Yep. They would have been up 3-1 instead of taking a 3-2 lead after 5. They would have won 4-1. So game 6, teams are tied going into the fourth quarter. On the very first possession of the fourth quarter, Scott Pollard, who's the backup center, was called for one of the worst moving screens you will ever see. He was technically moving, but he was moving like towards the player that was moving towards him. You will almost never see that called. It wasn't where he was jutting his hip out. It wasn't where he was getting in better position. He just misanticipated how fast the defender was coming at him. The defender still hit him in the chest. This was not a moving screen that should have been called, but it was. This is, as I mentioned earlier, they ran a lot of double screens. This is the last one that I saw in the fourth quarter when I went back and watched. There were no more like double screens after this. which is okay because on the ensuing trip down the floor after this, which was Scott Pollard's 5th foul, he is called for his 6th foul on good defense. Shaq puts his shoulder in his chest, pushes him back to clear space, which is an offensive foul. And then Scott Pollard shuffles forward to crowd him, doesn't make contact with his legs, doesn't make contact with his chest, doesn't make contact with his arms, not even in the I was crowding you, but then put my arms straight up again situation. Like, he didn't touch him, and they call him for his 6th foul. He fouled out in 11 minutes total of play. 11 minutes. He collected
That's
6
the
fouls.
Shaq thing too, right? Like Shaq always complained that like he was always getting hacked on and all this stuff, and he was for the most part. Like he was just a bigger guy, so it took more force to move him. So he would get fouled a lot, and he claimed that it wouldn't get called because if you did the same thing to Kobe Bryant, like he's flying across the floor, but he's just such a massive human, it takes more to move you, and so maybe he has an argument.
Yeah.
Just maybe.
Maybe. To the Lakers' credit, they take advantage of what they see starting to happen and what had already been brewing throughout the game. Their fourth quarter offensive strategy was give the ball to Shaq. Now, this is the height of Shaq's powers. That makes sense. But like in the huddle, they're coming back from timeouts, and they're reporting from the huddle that Phil Jackson said legitimately, Shaq gets the ball every time down the floor. Do not do anything but throw Shaq the ball. To the point where at one point Doug Christie is guarding Kobe Bryant, and Kobe's standing on the wing, just like faking the pass into Shaq, and Doug Christie plays all the way off of Kobe down into the post to deny the pass. Would never happen in today's NBA because you're just going to shoot the three at that point. But because it was 2002, they swing the ball around and get it to Shaq anyway. Pollard, so like I said, fouled out with 11 minutes of play. Devos got his 5th with over half the fourth quarter left. Remember, 6 fouls in the NBA. Weber picked up his 4th on one of the most clear examples of game manipulation you will ever, ever, ever see. He takes and I think it's Rick Fox that's on him. It may have been Robert Horry. Either way, he's got him. He faces him up, and he drives diagonally. His first steps are diagonally back towards the key. So he's on the left baseline, and he drives diagonally back toward the top of the key, gets position on his defender. His defender hits him. He doesn't hit him in the chest. He hits him in the side. The referee calls a charge. You don't have to take my words that this was a bad call, because on the broadcast, Bill Walton immediately, not after seeing a replay, not after thinking about it, like whistle, quote, "This is a terrible call." And then on replay explains why it was a terrible call. It took away a basket with 3 minutes left that would have given the Kings a 4-point lead in the game, adds a foul to Chris Webber, keeps it at a 2-point lead. That sends it to commercial. When they come back, they do the foul trouble graphic. On the Lakers side is one name, point guard Derek Fisher with 4 fouls. On the Kings side, it shows Scott Pollard fouled out, Vlade Divac 5, Chris Webber 4, Hedo Turkoglu 4. There's 4 Kings players in foul trouble to 1 Laker. With 2 minutes left, down 1. On the second example of game manipulation, Kobe drives the baseline on Doug Christie. Doug Christie does bump him. 3 steps later on the shot, Doug Christie's called for a foul on Kobe Bryant. There again is no contact at that point. If anybody was going to be called for a foul, it was Chris Webber, who blocked the shot cleanly, but not Doug Christie, who was called for it. Again, he bumped him early, maybe a foul on the floor. Reminder, in the NBA, the first foul under 2 minutes is nothing, right? The penalty is different in the last 2 minutes of the half. So it would have been ball side out of bounds, not free throws, but they gave them free throws. It wasn't like, and I know what somebody's going to say, like listening to this, like, oh, well, it's the NBA. They do continuation all the time. This wasn't even a continuation situation. Like, he fouled him on the baseline. If he fouled him, he took 3 more steps, 2 more dribbles, gathered, and then shot. Like, nobody's giving him continuation on that. It's just a terrible call. So like I said, should have been their ball. It was the first foul under 2 timeouts. At this point, Chris Webber looked defeated. Like, he just stares blankly at the official. Mike Bibby fell to his knees at the free throw line when this was called. Like, out of his mind. And we've all had this feeling at some point in our lives where it's like you're not mad and you're not sad. You're just completely like, what is happening? Bizarro world situation. That's where Bibby was. Like, he's on his knees on the court after this call. Kobe nails some free throws to give the team a 1-point lead. Turkoglu missed a fall away on the other end, and he fouled Rick Fox. The Lakers get a 3-point lead after the free throws. Another questionable call with 1:15 left gives Fox 2 more free throws to keep the lead at 3 after the Kings had made a shot, and then everything falls apart. Under 1 minute to play and down 3, Mike Bibby drives, and based on everything that had been called in the fourth quarter so far, should have been given a foul somewhere. He was bumped on his drive. He was fouled in the air. Based on what they were calling on the other end, it should have been one. He gets nothing, and the game continues. The Kings, to their credit, stay in the game through all of these calls. With under 20 seconds left, Heydou Turkoglu hits a layup to cut the lead to 1. And on the inbound, there's not a timeout. They inbound from the baseline. Mike Bibby sets up face guarding Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant brings his elbow up, puts his elbow square into the nose of Mike Bibby, and gets open for the inbounds by fouling Mike Bibby in full view of not 1, not 2, but where all 3 referees on the floor should have been looking in that moment, which is towards the free throw line. Like, no matter what they were actually looking at, their peripheral vision should have seen that spot. All 3 of them, nobody blew a whistle. It gets into NC State stuff territory by this point because today we would review that. That's a flagrant 1, easy. Like, you're getting free throws. We know this happened. But not only was it no call, and not only are all 3 commentators, again, before the replay saying, what is happening? Mike Bibby's nose starts bleeding because of the elbow to the face, and it forces the Kings to either get him out of the game and stop it or call timeout, which is what they do. They need Mike Bibby on the floor, but that's their last timeout. So when Kobe makes both free throws to make it a 3-point game, the Kings should have had a timeout. In the NBA, at the end of the game, you can advance the ball to midcourt. They're unable to do that because they used their last timeout on fixing Mike Bibby's nose on a play that should have been an offensive foul, and then with the ball to win the game, not tie it. From the jump, and Blake's going to tell you more about this, but from the jump, this game is criticized heavily. By the end of it, Rick Adelman is sitting in his chair. He's not even arguing calls anymore. He looks like he's ready to jump off a bridge. Chris Webber looks more defeated than the time he called timeout when he didn't have one. It was not going well. Because I'm an NC State fan and I have PTSD, watching the game, most of these calls, honestly, could be 50-50 calls on both sides. But all of those calls go one way, which is a hallmark of bad officiating. All the 50-50 calls going one way makes you think something's up. On one hand, it's either terrible officiating or it's game manipulation. But again, to the Lakers' credit, it's not the officials who cleared the ball to Big Shot Bob. It was not the officials who missed open threes down the stretch in Game 7 to lose it for the Kings. But hey, telling people what the referees didn't do, also a hallmark of bad officiating, because we only do that after games that are poorly officiated. But yeah, That's game 6 in a nutshell.
Tough, right? Absolutely heartbreaking because like this was essentially their best run historically looking back at it now. This was their best run at it. Again, they had a chance to win game 4, and they were close in game 7. It wasn't a blowout or anything, but it was just missing shots. And so I mean, but I'd be defeated too after this game 6. But you almost feel bad for Chris Webber because he's not a questionable person. I wouldn't say he's a questionable person, but his decisions in basketball sometimes have been questionable. You mentioned the 1993 championship game against a local team near us, one wonderful, outstanding program, and he ended up costing them the game essentially because he got double teamed in a corner, called a timeout when they didn't have one. That's the turnover. So that was the Fab Five's best chance. That was his fault. That was him. This game 6 stuff is just hard to believe. Like it's just really, really hard to believe. And eventually, and everybody probably knows who Tim Donaghy is. He's the disgraced former NFL NBA official who ended up going to federal trial over gambling and game fixing and all that stuff. He wasn't assigned to work this game, obviously, but during his federal trial a few years later, he wrote a letter to the judge of that trial, basically saying that he had inside information that 2 of these 3 officials working this game 6 wanted a game 7. In this letter, he wrote, quote, Dick Bavetta claimed several times to several of us, meaning other officials, that he was the NBA's go-to guy. He was put on game 6s to force game 7s. And I told you earlier that I told you about that happy little 1998 game 6 incident where the one call was blown. And there's not like this huge controversy over that game 6, by the way. That like he missed that one 3-pointer, should have gone the Jazz's way, and that could have changed the tide of history. And then eventually, the next year, or the year that this happened, Bill Simmons wrote an article in 2002 stating, basically writing out the 7 games that had the worst officiating in the last 5 years, I think it was. And this game was one of them. But Dick Bavetta, officiated all 7 of the games that Bill Simmons had on his list for worst officiated games, like in recent memory. It's tough. Like, what do you do as a player? What do you do as a player? How do you get over that?
I don't know. And specifically the Chris Webber situation, man, like that dude has to be mentally strong to have gone through 2 of these such like kind of heartbreaking situations. But yes, when there's something to it when Bavetta shows up in every poorly officiating game, right? And it doesn't have to be that there's something nefarious going on. But when the preponderance of evidence suggests that, like, we can't exclude that something's nefarious is going on because he keeps showing up and bad things keep happening. You can't take Donaghy's word necessarily, right? Because at the same time that he's got nothing to lose, so he can tell all the secrets, he also has nothing, and so he's looking to pick up whatever he can. But if Bavetta always shows up at game 6 and most of the time it goes to a game 7, that's not random. I mean, that's, you know what I mean? No. Like, I didn't mention this, but this game 7 is the most watched conference final game since before the Jordan Bulls game run in the 90s. Like,
it was a good one.
It paid off in terms of viewership by going to a 7th game. So yeah, I mean,
and the finals were an absolute just blowout.
Roll. They rolled
the Lakers swept the Nets in 4 games, and so that wasn't exciting at all. But the storyline of Kobe and Shaq winning their 3rd straight title together, that was was the story. The games were terrible. Richard Jefferson and Jason Kidd's Nets, just
Kenyon Martin.
Ouch.
Yeah, no. Whoever won this series is going to roll. But yeah, forever goodbye to Dick Bavetta on this situation because, yeah, nefarious or not, dude did not perform well in pressure
Get your
spots.
did he need glasses? Did he need contacts? Like what? I don't know. I truly don't understand, but whatever. He's gone now. I think he retired last year. Actually, I think he retired in 2021 as like the NBA's all time leading official in games. So, he's like 86. But anyway, Bernhardt, one of the other officials, somehow a reporter from the Chicago Tribune found him at a campground in 2008 and interviewed him about this whole situation. 6 years later, he was quoted as saying, "After the game, I wasn't happy, not with a particular call, but it just wasn't a good game for us," meaning the three officials. He also was quoted by saying, "I never imagined we'd be talking about this 6 years later." I don't think he had anything to do with it. Like, if it was nefarious, I don't think he had anything to do with it. It's just funny that he got tracked down so many years later and was asked about this, and he was like, "I can't believe this is still a thing. Like, it shouldn't be a thing. Shouldn't have been a thing." But one final note on this on the referees aftermath. A website called 82games.com broke down every call from Game 6. It basically determined that the calls were lopsided in the favor of the Lakers, especially in the fourth quarter. This person who did this analysis, determined that the questionable or outright incorrect calls favored the Lakers 7-2. 7-2. The writer also claims that these calls likely cost the Kings 6 total points. And this guy is, as far as anyone can tell, is completely unbiased. Is not like an NBA person. Is not like a big media person. He just watched the game back and analyzed the calls. He did say, though, that he did not believe that the game was rigged. He did say that. He believed that Delaney called the game pretty evenly. He claimed that Bernhardt made calls that were slightly in LA's favor. But he said that Bavetta's calls, especially late in the game, the ones you talked about, favored LA more than the other two referees did. And he wrote an entire explanation for this. He broke all of this stuff down in writing. You can go find it on the internet. It's floating around out there. And so go watch this game for yourself. But it's heartbreaking. Heartbreaking for the Kings, because this was a potential dynasty team. They were built the right way. They were doing all the right things except making a few shots. But every team goes through that, right? The Warriors blew a 3-1 finals lead after winning 73 games in a regular season. That was heartbreaking. But so this happens, but like they just didn't get another chance. They just didn't get another chance to prove themselves, and that's tough.
Yeah, and especially in the NBA where all three officials have the same roles and responsibilities. They rotate position on the floor throughout the game. It's not the NFL where it's one dude can make a call. One official really can change. One official having a terrible day. One official maybe sort of kind of doing something nefarious can actually impact a game. And that's when it's not fun, right? That is not. Go back. I challenge anybody to go back. It's on YouTube. Type in 2002 Game 6. The game is there. You can fast forward to the fourth quarter. Like, watch it. It's not fun to watch. Like, it's fun to watch 2002 basketball. They do some things that nobody would do now, where they mid-range shots and passing up threes and doing some other silly things. But it's just not fun to watch a game that's being terribly officiated, because you don't know what to expect as a fan. You don't know what you're getting ready to see next. Blech.
Yeah, tough.
To the Kings, to back up your dynasty point, I think a lot of times when this story gets told, it's that, okay, so they lost and then the franchise just imploded from there. It had some more opportunities, but they never could get it done. This was their probably best chance. They would go on to lose in the Western semis the next 2 years in 7 games. 7 games seem to be there. So remember, the first 2 years of this run, they lost in 5-game series. They lost to the Lakers in a 7-game. They lose next 2 years in 7-game losses. I mean, they are losing in the most heartbreaking fashion every single year. Then they would go on to have 2 more first-round losses as the team lost its core. They eventually traded Weber. They fired Adelman. In 03, 04, and 05, the 3 seasons after this, they were either second or third in preseason odds to win the championship. So they were still highly favored, highly respected teams, then just never got it done. But their last playoff appearance was 05, 06. And since then, just like the 15 years preceding this run, they have now gone on a streak of 16 consecutive losing seasons. They are the team that appears on the list of playoff droughts in the NBA when you start looking at it, because they just never could get over the hump. And it would have been fun to watch this team build. It is, I think in sports, we have, just like I said at the beginning, this hopeless optimism, like wait till next year. They'll be back. They'll have another chance. And eventually that's wrong. And we don't always think about that, right? Like Dan Marino goes to a Super Bowl in his second year. Never, ever, ever gets close to another one. Sometimes teams don't finish the story. Sometimes they don't get over the hump. And that's almost as bad as when they do get that great narrative finish. That the one is almost as bad as the other is good. And in the Kings case, it was bad.
It's tough, and this should absolutely be a case study in your team is making the playoffs. Your team is winning your division. Your team is even winning your conference. You're advancing in the playoffs year after year. You're making game 7s year after year, and you fire the coach and you trade the best player? You're still right there. What are you doing? That might be the most frustrating thing in sports, is when we expect to win every year. You get second every year, not good enough. You're out. You're gonna fire this. Like, you're gonna fire that person. You're gonna trade away. Like, you're gonna rebuild after. This might have been, as far as wins over, say, Rick Adelman's time. I would like to know this. I might do this after this recording's over. But if anyone out there wants to do it too, find Rick Adelman's win total in Sacramento, and then find how many coaches did that in history. Because he won a lot of games and then got fired for it. Just because, and this is the thing, it is really freaking hard to win professional sports championships. It's just hard. Patrick Mahomes has only got one, right?
Yep.
What? It's like, yeah, everyone's spoiled by Tom Brady, and everyone's spoiled by the Michael Jordans, and everyone's spoiled by the Shaqs and by the Kobes, and Curry's got 3, and LeBron's won 4 titles with 3 different places, and like all these, you don't get those. You just don't get those. So blowing up what you have that is consistently winning, just in hopes of a pipe dream to get like the once in a lifetime player, you just can't put yourself through that, because look what happened. This is what happens when you do that. You have a great core, you have a great coach, you're winning games, you're winning playoff series, and then look what happens. You blow it up and you lose, and you have 16 straight losing seasons. This should be the case study for that.
Rick Adelman, to answer your question, Rick Adelman is 10th all time in wins, just in general. He hasn't, he did coach after this, but he won 395 games in Sacramento, which 395 by itself would be the 53rd most wins in NBA history. So forget the Portland and anything else. 395 is that most. That is slightly less than a Steve Kerr run, and in the same number of seasons. So he's like a Steve Kerr. Like, imagine the
Right.
Warriors not quite getting there, and you fire him, and Now that's a fan thing, right? That's where
Sure.
we aren't getting over the hump. We got to change something. We got to do something. This ain't working. Weber can't win. Adelman can't get us there. We got to fix it right now. I'm a Carolina Hurricanes fans. We are the fan base the fan base of that team is already starting to say things like, I don't know if Rod Brindamore is the right coach for this team. When 4 years ago they were getting ready to move to Houston, like let's calm down.
He's kept them here, people. Like, let's get over it. Let's get over yourselves.
Let's watch the thing to its conclusion. But I mean, fans do that, and it never really makes a whole lot of sense because they want to win. I get it.
Sure, but everyone does.
Yes. And for this team in particular, heartbreaking fashion, and then the franchise is falling apart too. It's always rumored to be on the move. Nobody's showing up to games, that kind of stuff. So, anyway, that's what you don't know about the 2002 NBA Finals, NBA Western Conference Finals, Game 6. If you enjoyed us, let us know. If you got a story idea for us, let us know. And we hope to see you next time. Thanks for listening.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of What You Don't Know About Sports. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us a review, 5 stars only please, and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen. If you have a great sports story, we want to hear about it. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WYDKAS Podcast, and on our YouTube channel at What You Don't Know About Sports Podcast. All episodes are written, recorded, and edited by us. Stay tuned for the next episode.